Before we begin, let me loosen something. What you're about to hear isn't history the way textbooks like it. It isn't myth the way we've been taught to dismiss it. And it isn't poetry, though sometimes I ran out of facts and had to use memory instead. This is time, told the way humans used to understand it, through story, through sky, through body, through blood, through repetition, through return. Some of what you'll hear is solid, verifiable, on record. Some of it is lore, held in fragments. And some of it's simply what time feels like when you stop obeying the clock long enough to listen. This isn't here to tell you what to believe. It won't dismantle your calendar. It won't mock the way you live. It won't ask you to burn your planner and go live in a cave. It's here to ask a quieter question. When did time stop belonging to the earth and start belonging to power? If anything in this feels unfamiliar or unsettling or strangely comforting, that doesn't mean something is wrong. It might just mean you're remembering a rhythm you were never meant to forget. So don't listen to this like a lecture. Listen like a landscape. Walk slowly. Let it open when it's ready. Let's begin. Not with a date, but with a question. Happy New Year! Or Happy 2026? According to who? Because that question alone changes everything. We say New Year like it's a fact, like it arrived on its own, like the world agreed. But dates don't fall from the sky. They're chosen, named, enforced. Cultures have counted time differently for as long as humans have watched the sun and the moon. Different beginnings, different rhythms, different ideas of what even means to begin. So when we say Happy New Year, what we're really doing is repeating a decision, not made by nature, not made by the body, but made by systems that needed time to behave. But before any of that, before the systems, the schedules, the numbered years, humans already knew when things were turning. Not because someone told them, because the sky moved, because the body shifted, because something came back. So let's begin there, not with a number, but with the return. The first clock humans trusted wasn't built, it rose. Long before calendars, cities, before kings needed dates to rule by, humans were already keeping time. Not with numbers, not with names, with the moon. The oldest time markers we've found don't come from temples or empires. They come from bones, carried by hunter-gatherers tens of thousands of years before history begins. In southern Africa, near the Lebombo Mountains, archaeologists uncovered a small piece of bone, carved with a sequence of notches. It's dated to around 44,000 years ago. The marks aren't random. They cluster. They repeat. 28 notches. Enough to track a lunar cycle. Enough to follow the moon from dark to full and back again. Further north, at the source of the Nile, near what's now the Democratic Republic of Congo, another bone was found. The Ishango bone, dated to around 20,000 years ago, marked with careful groupings, deliberate. Some see arithmetic, some see astronomy, but nearly all agree this is timekeeping, not the kind that counts years, the kind that tracks return. Across continents from Africa to Europe, similar tools appear. Antler, stone, bone. Again and again the same instinct. Watch the sky. Mark the moon. Remember when it comes back. This wasn't religion. It was survival. The moon moved tides. It shifted animals' behavior. It changed night visibility. It shaped hunting, foraging, travel. You didn't need to know what day it was. You needed to know where you were in the cycle. Full meant light. Dark meant caution. Returning meant preparation. Time wasn't abstract. It was visible, rhythmic, alive. And this way of keeping time wasn't rare. It appeared again and again because it worked. Long before solar calendars, long before months were numbered, long before years were named, the moon was the first shared clock humanity ever trusted, because it didn't belong to anyone. And anything that doesn't belong to power eventually becomes a problem for it. But it wasn't just the sky they were watching themselves, because the same rhythm that moved the moon was moving inside human bodies too. Cycles that bled, cycles that prepared, cycles that knew when to open and when to hold. And if the moon was the first external clock, then the body was the first internal one. But unlike machines, it didn't count. It responded. And that eventually became inconvenient. When we talk about the body keeping time, it's important to say this clearly. Our ancestors didn't fail to control birth. They never tried. The idea wouldn't have made sense to them. You didn't look at a body and think, let's make this match a date. Across cultures, birth was treated as a threshold, not an appointment. Something you crossed, not something you scheduled. And that understanding didn't begin with birth. It began with cycles. The moon takes roughly 28 days to move from dark to dark. So does the average human menstrual cycle. That isn't poetry. That's physiology. People noticed. When the moon mattered, the bleed mattered. Not symbolically, practically. Menstrual cycles weren't ignored. They were watched. Not because women were fragile, because they were informative. In ancient Mesopotamia, menstrual blood wasn't treated as dirt. It was treated as potent. In some traditions, bleeding marked a woman as temporarily set apart. Not exiled, not punished. Unavailable. Unavailable for labor, unavailable for sex, unavailable for demand. That wasn't shame. That was boundary. In many indigenous cultures, bleeding women were given space, lodges, tents, periods of withdrawal, not because they were impure, because they were in transition. Menstrual time was treated like threshold time, neither here nor there, neither productive nor idle. A pause. And pauses mattered. The moon wasn't just a light in the sky, it was a shared reference. When the moon darkened, bleeding often followed. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough to be meaningful. Time could be read, not on paper, in bodies. Pregnancy wasn't counted in weeks, it was counted in moons. Midwives didn't work with clocks, they worked with bodies. They watched for signs. Breath, stillness, readiness. Birth didn't arrive on a date. It arrived when the body said yes. That wasn't chaos. That was trust. Now look at us. Now we live in a world where birth can be booked, chosen, aligned. We can decide the day, the hour. We can make it match a birthday, a schedule, or a family event. Whatever the calendar says matters. I'm not saying this to judge. I'm saying it to name the shift. I know that some births do have to be scheduled due to health issues, health in the pregnancy, or something like that. That was not what I was referring at. It's simply at the fact that some people do choose the dates because they can to match something that for them it's important. So they rush the body, they rush the process, and our body has a rhythm, our body has its own time, and nowadays we just don't listen to it. At some point, we stopped trusting the body to know when life should arrive and started trusting the calendar instead. That's not just medicine, that's philosophy. And the same thing happened to the bleed. We like to say there's no taboo around menstruation anymore, that we've moved on. We have products, apps, adverts, pink packaging, blue liquid demonstrations, clinical language. But watch what actually happens. Girls are still taught to hide it, to manage it quietly, to apologize for it, to carry on as normal. The bleed doesn't stop work. Work stops the bleed. There is no sanctioned pause, no threshold, no recognition that the body has entered a different phase of time. So what changed wasn't the cycle. It was the permission to respond to it. In the old world, the calendar bent to the body. Now, the body is expected to bend to the calendar. Bleeding is no longer information. It's an inconvenience, something to suppress, regulate, medicate, schedule around. That's not liberation. That's assimilation. So when we talk about booking births, choosing dates, aligning life with convenience instead of readiness, it didn't start there. It started when the body stopped being allowed to interrupt time. But the body wasn't the only thing that refused to run on a straight line. The sky did too. And when humans first tried to make a calendar, they ran into a problem, a very old one. Time didn't fit. When ancient cultures added time outside the year, it wasn't superstition, it was problem solving. They had a simple issue. The sky doesn't fit neatly into human numbers. The moon doesn't divine cleanly into a year. Neither does the sun. So early calendars drifted. Seasons slipped. Festivals wandered. Planting dates went wrong. If you didn't correct for that drift, you starved. In ancient Egypt, the solar year was observed to be roughly 365 days, but their months only accounted for 360, so 5 days were left over. They didn't hide them, they named them. Those 5 days weren't assigned to any month. They weren't taxed, they weren't worked. They were treated as unstable, because they didn't belong to ordinary time. Myth explains what math already knew. Those days were said to be the birthdays of the gods. Why? Because when time breaks its own rules, something bigger is happening. Practically, work slowed. Rituals took priority. People were cautious. Because everyone knew this was a hinge, a recalibration. The Maya faced the same problem. Their calendar was mathematically elegant. 18 months of 20 days. That gave them 360 days. The sun didn't care. 5 extra days stood outside the count. They called them Wayeb. And they didn't pretend those days were normal. The Wayeb were understood as dangerous, not evil, unbalanced. During those days, people avoided travel, avoided major decisions. Rituals focused on protection and reset. Because this was the moment the calendar caught up with reality. In Celtic regions, the problem was framed differently. The year wasn't divided cleanly. It thinned. Samhain wasn't an extra day added for math. It was a recognition that the old year had ended, but the new one hadn't fully arrived. This wasn't bookkeeping. It was lived experience. The harvest was in. The land was going dormant. The rules that governed the growing season no longer applied. So laws softened. Debts paused. Stories were told. The dead were remembered. Because when the world shifts gears, people feel it. We have very angry magpies around. They're making a racket. Can you hear it? I'm sure you can. The Hebrew calendar solved the problem openly. It admitted the drift. A lunar year is about 11 days shorter than a solar one. Ignore that, and festivals slide out of season. So a leap month was added when necessary, not arbitrarily, by observation. When Passover risked leaving spring, time was corrected, not because humans wanted control, but because the sky demanded alignment. Different calendars, different gods, different math, but they all arrived at the same truth. Time doesn't always line up, and when it doesn't, something sacred enters. Across all these cultures, the logic is the same. Time is not perfectly countable, so when the calendar failed, people stopped pretending it hadn't. They marked the break. They slowed down. They adjusted. They treated those days differently, because they were different. Threshold time wasn't mystical. It was honest. It was the admission that life doesn't move in straight lines, and neither does the sky. Empires don't like admissions. They like rules. They like uniformity. And they really don't like days that can't be owned. So eventually, the doorway had to close. But even the moon was only part of the rhythm. There was something closer, something even older than counting. The land. For most of human history, the year did not begin because someone announced it. It began because the world itself shifted. In early agrarian cultures, long before Rome, long before Christianity, time was read through change, not decree. People watched the soil, the light, the behavior of animals, the movement of water. Survival depended on knowing when the earth was ready to respond. In Sumer, the turning of the year was tied to the barley cycle and the flooding of the rivers. New beginnings aligned with planting and renewal, not with winter stillness. Festivals marked the return of fertility to the land, the reopening of what had been dormant, the moment life began moving outward again. In ancient Egypt, the year turned with the Nile. When the floodwaters arrived, they didn't bring destruction. They brought silt, renewal, and the signal that planting could begin again. Across the ancient Near East, the beginning of the year clustered around spring, not because it was symbolic, because it made sense. Seeds could be planted, animals gave birth, light returned long enough to work by. The land itself signaled that it was ready. Even myth reflects this logic. In Mesopotamian stories, the descent and return of Inanna mirrors the agricultural cycle, life withdrawing, then re-emerging. These weren't abstract tales. They were shaped by what the land actually did, by what people saw happen every year. Among early Indo-European cultures, the year was structured around pastoral movement. Herds returned, grazing resumed, travel became possible again. The beginning of the year followed motion, not stillness. Across cultures, the pattern repeats. The year began when growth resumed, when the ground softened, when warmth held long enough to risk planting. This wasn't romantic. It was survival. Plant too early and you lost everything. Plant too late and the season passed you by. Timekeeping wasn't philosophical. It was embedded in food, breath, birth, movement. People didn't just read the fields. They felt the shift in their bodies. Appetite changed. Sleep deepened. Breath moved differently in the morning air. People watched frost lines retreat. They noticed when days lengthened enough to hold warmth. They paid attention to what returned first. Insects, birds, shoots, water. That return was the beginning, not a date, not a proclamation, a response. The year didn't start all at once. It leaned into life gradually, and humans learned to lean with it. beginning again not because the calendar said so, but because the earth had opened. The year did not begin when someone declared it had begun. It began when the earth was ready, and for a very long time, humans knew how to listen. Once you live inside Earth time long enough, something else becomes obvious. Time is not moving away from you, it is coming back. For most ancient cultures, time wasn't imagined as a straight road. There was no finish line, no race to the future, no sense of ahead the way we use it now. What mattered wasn't how far you traveled, but whether you were in rhythm. This is why so many early societies described time as circular, seasonal, returning, not because they lacked imagination, but because that's what life actually did. In Mesopotamia, time followed the rhythm of the land: flood, planting, harvest, rest. Again and again. With variation, yes, but no final destination. Even kings ruled inside cycles, not above them. In ancient Egypt, time had two forms: nehe, the cyclical flow of seasons and return; jet, the enduring continuity that held everything steady. Time wasn't a march forward. It was movement within something lasting. Among early Indo-European peoples, memory traveled backward as much as forward. Ancestors weren't behind you, they were ahead, already having walked the ground you now crossed. The past wasn't gone, it was present, instructive, alive. This logic repeats because it reflects reality. Crops don't improve endlessly. Bodies don't get more efficient forever. Light wanes, darkness deepens, life contracts, before it expands again. Birth, growth, decay, rest, return. Not as failure, as design. Even language carries this memory. In many early cultures, there was no concept of progress as we use it today. There was continuity, balance, return. A good year wasn't one that achieved something abstract. It was one that stayed in harmony. Spiral time isn't repetition without change. It's repetition with memory. Each return is informed by what came before. You don't arrive somewhere new. You arrive somewhere familiar, carrying more experience. This is why forgetting mattered more than innovation. Losing rhythm was more dangerous than standing still. To be out of sync with the land, the sky, the body, that was failure. Time didn't take you somewhere better. It brought you back to what worked. And as long as humans lived this way, time remained something you participated in, not something that judged you. But rhythms resist control, and that's where the pressure begins. A system like this only works as long as life is allowed to remain uneven, as long as beginnings arrive gradually, as long as readiness matters more than speed, as long as time is read, not enforced. But rhythm has a weakness. It resists control. Cycles drift, seasons vary, bodies don't synchronize on command, harvests arrive when they arrive, birth happens when it happens, threshold days interrupt work, pauses break schedules. Nothing lines up cleanly. For small communities, this wasn't a problem. It was reality. But once societies grew, once land had to be governed, taxed, defended, expanded, rhythm became inconvenient. You can't run armies on seasonal intuition. You can't collect taxes on readiness. You can't administer territory if every region listens to a different sky. Power needs predictability. It needs dates that behave, years that line up, months that don't wander, days that can be counted, owned, repeated. But cycles don't offer that. They return, but they don't obey. Spiral time remembers too much. It keeps pulling the past into the present. It refuses to forget pauses, thresholds and limits. It keeps reminding people that life moves in pulses, not straight lines. And for anyone trying to rule at scale, that's a problem. So pressure builds. Not all at once, not violently at first, quietly. Calendars begin to harden, flexibility starts to vanish, corrections are framed as improvements, standardization is sold as clarity. Time stops being something you live inside and becomes something you organize. And once time has to function for power to operate, one thing becomes inevitable. The cycles must be disciplined. And that's where the break happens. Something changes when time is no longer allowed to drift. At first, it doesn't look violent. It looks reasonable. By the late Roman Republic, calendars were already tools of power. Months could be lengthened or shortened. Days could be added or removed. Officials manipulated the year to extend terms, delay elections, or punish rivals. Time was flexible, but that flexibility belonged to those in charge. As Rome expanded, that looseness became a problem. Armies were moving across continents. Tax systems stretched across regions with different seasons. Legal contracts needed fixed durations. Religious festivals had drifted far enough from the land that they no longer matched what people were experiencing. Time needed to behave. So in 46 before Common Era, Julius Caesar intervened, not as a philosopher, as an administrator. The Julian reform replaced lunar adjustment with a rigid solar structure. The year was fixed at 365 days. A leap day was added every 4 years. Months were standardized. Drift was no longer negotiated. It was engineered out. This wasn't about truth. It was about control. The land was no longer consulted. The sky was no longer observed. The year would now turn when authority said it turned. But even this fix required force. To realign the calendar, that year was extended to 445 days. Nearly 3 months were inserted. People lived inside a year that refused to end. Time didn't flow, it stalled. And then it snapped back into place. What mattered wasn't the confusion. What mattered was the precedent. Time could be edited. Centuries later, that edit happened again. The Julian calendar was close, but not exact. 11 minutes off each year doesn't feel like much until centuries pass. By the 16th century, the calendar was 10 days out of alignment with the sky. Spring was arriving earlier than the dates claimed. Festivals no longer matched the seasons they were meant to honor. This time the correction came from the Church. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII ordered the calendar reset. 10 days were removed, not shifted, not renamed, removed. In places that adopted the reform immediately, October 4th was followed by October 15th. The days in between were declared never to have existed. People noticed. Workers protested. Rent was disputed. Lives felt shortened. Memory no longer matched record. But the change held, because once time is altered by decree and survives, something else becomes clear. Time no longer belongs to the world. It belongs to whoever can enforce the calendar. Different nations adopted the change at different times. England waited until 1752 and erased 11 days. Russia waited until 1918 and erased 13. Each transition fractured memory in a different way. There was never one correction. There were many, layered, uneven, quietly accepted. This was the moment time stopped being something humans adjusted to life and became something life was adjusted to. The doorway didn't close all at once. It narrowed. Threshold days disappeared. Pauses were absorbed. Drift was treated as error. Time became a straight line with no tolerance for breath. And once you realize days can be removed, you start noticing what else was moved. Rome proved that time could be edited. Christian Europe later proved it could be sanctified. Empire after empire proved it could be exported. But that does not mean it worked everywhere. What tends to get lost in modern storytelling is this. There was never a single moment when the world agreed to live inside one calendar. While Roman time hardened, many cultures kept their own rhythms, sometimes openly, sometimes layered beneath official systems, sometimes in ways that were never written down at all. Time fractured, not once, but again and again, in different directions. In much of the world, the Roman calendar existed only as an administrative overlay. It governed taxes, decrees, and paperwork, but daily life still answered to land, ritual, ancestry, and sky. In Jewish communities under Roman and later Christian rule, time did not convert. The calendar remained lunisolar. Months were adjusted by observation. Festivals stayed rooted in seasons, not fixed dates. Even when empires changed, Passover still waited for spring. In the Islamic world, time took a different turn entirely. The calendar was deliberately lunar, untethered from the sun. Months moved through the seasons by design. This wasn't a flaw. It was a refusal to let sacred time be ruled by agriculture, empire, or the fiscal year. The drift wasn't an error. It was the point. In China, Roman time meant nothing. Time reset with dynasties. Each emperor marked a new era. History didn't move forward in a single line. It restarted, shaped by mandate, cosmology, legitimacy. Time served a different logic, one that had nothing to do with Western chronology. Across much of Africa, numbered years were never the primary way time was held. Time was measured in events, reigns, seasons, generations, and ancestors. The question wasn't, what year is it? It was, who has lived? What has happened? What phase are we in? And in a few places, resistance went even further. In Ethiopia, the calendar itself survived. 13 months, a different new year, a different year count. Christian, but not Roman timed. Its time system remains intact, not as a protest, as a continuity. Among the Dogon people of West Africa, time was never flattened into a line to begin with. Cosmology doesn't point forward, it layers. Past, present, ancestor, and sky coexist. Time isn't something you pass through, it's something you stand inside. These cultures didn't reject Roman time in some dramatic revolt. Most simply never reorganized their lives around it. And that's the part history often forgets. Power can enforce calendars. It can standardize administration. It can declare dates official. But it cannot fully erase how people orient themselves to life. So instead of one global timeline replacing all others, what emerged was something messier. Parallel time. Multiple calendars running at once. Different years on the same planet. Official time on paper. Lived time in bodies, rituals, seasons, and memory. The knife cut deep, but not clean. And the fact that you can still feel time pulling in different directions today, that's not confusion. That's residue. Now let me show you something you've held your whole life without ever seeing it. Not a relic, not a scripture, not an artifact from a museum. A deck of cards. 52 cards, 4 suits, 12 court cards, 13 values in each suit, 2 jokers watching from the edge of the world. You thought it was a game. It was a calendar. 1 card for every week of the year, 4 suits for the 4 seasons, 13 cards per suit for the 13 moons, 12 royals for the 12 months of the empire's year. And if you add up every symbol on every card, you land on 365, the year in your hand, hidden in plain sight. And the jokers, the wild cards, those aren't accidents either. They are the missing days, the days outside of time, the 13th month the empire tried to erase. One joker for the day the old world forgot, the other for the day the new world stole. Chaos days, holy days, liminal days, days that never belonged to the calendar or to the crown. Because long before casinos and card tricks, long before Vegas and poker nights, cards were divination tools. Persian, Indian, Egyptian, early versions were carved and painted with symbols of seasons, elements, cycles, the turning of the year. They were never just games. They were almanacs. And when the church tightened its grip on calendars, when lunar time was outlawed, when the 13th moon was forced underground, the people hid their old knowledge in symbols, in pictures, in little rectangles of painted wood and pasteboard. A secret calendar you could shuffle into your pocket. A quiet rebellion that empire never managed to stamp out. The deck survived everything: Rome, Constantine, the Gregorian reform, purges, witch hunts, bans on divination, bans on games, bans on gatherings. Because you can burn a book, but a game, a pastime, a trick of the hand, that slips right through the cracks. So the next time you pick up a deck, know you're holding something older than Christmas, older than the red suit, older than the calendar on your wall. You're holding the memory of a world that kept time with cycles, not clocks. A world that knew the year had 13 moons, not 12 boxes. And here's the part I love most. The Joker, the Fool, is the only card that can go anywhere, into any suit, any season, any story. He doesn't follow the rules of the deck. He breaks them, rewrites them, steps outside the game entirely. He is the reminder that you always have a choice. Play by their calendar or step into your own. Calendar change was never clean. After Rome fixed January as the administrative beginning of the year, and after Christian reforms reinforced it, daily life did not instantly realign. For centuries, people lived inside overlapping systems of time. Official records followed one calendar, communities followed another. Across medieval Europe, the year still turned with the land. In France, much of the population marked the new year around Easter or late March. In parts of Italy, it began on March 25th, the feast of the Annunciation, a date tied to conception, not bureaucracy. In England and Scotland, the legal year began on March 25th until the 18th century, even as January 1st crept into contracts and correspondence. For long stretches of time, people lived in 2 years at once. You could be in 1 year on paper and another in practice. Pay rent by January, but celebrate renewal in spring. Plant, marry, bury the dead, all in rhythm with a different beginning. This wasn't confusion, it was continuity. But continuity becomes a problem when power needs uniformity. As calendar reform spread, especially after the Gregorian shift in 1582, pressure to conform increased. Catholic regions adopted it quickly. Protestant ones resisted, not because of math, but because time had become political. Still, many people simply kept celebrating when they always had. And this is where the method changed. Instead of banning Spring New Year celebrations outright, culture reframed them. In France, those who exchanged New Year gifts in late March or early April were mocked, not as rebels, as fools. They were given a name, Poisson d'Avril, April fish, a fish that bites when it shouldn't, a creature out of season, something still, moving by the old rhythm in a changed current. The image mattered. Fish were plentiful in early spring, easy to catch, easy to trick. The term didn't accuse anyone of defiance. It painted them as naive. Then came the pranks, false invitations, empty gifts, mock presents exchanged on April 1st. The message was subtle but unmistakable. If you're still living in the old year, you're easy to fool. And that's the genius of ridicule. It doesn't ban, it doesn't argue, it doesn't need to prove itself. It makes memory embarrassing. By the 1600s, celebrating the Old New Year wasn't illegal. It was awkward. People stopped, not because they were forced, but because no one wants to be the last one swimming the wrong way. The fish didn't disappear because the water changed. It disappeared because everyone learned to laugh at it. And that mechanism didn't stay in Europe. When European empires expanded into Africa, Asia, and the Americas, they didn't just export borders, religion, and law. They exported clocks. Colonial administrations imposed European calendars for taxation, labor, and trade. But local time didn't vanish overnight. Agricultural rhythms continued. Ritual calendars stayed in use. Ancestral timekeeping held on beneath the surface. So ridicule stepped in again. Indigenous timekeeping was framed as primitive, unproductive, lazy, behind. People who didn't organize life around the clock were described as unreliable, late, childlike. This wasn't about accuracy. It was about legitimacy. Because if your time could be made to feel inferior, replacing it didn't look like violence. It looked like progress. In many African societies, ceremonies began when elders arrived and conditions were right, not when a hand pointed at a number. Europeans mocked this as African time, a phrase still used as a joke. And that joke does the same work Poisson d'Avril once did. It turns myth into a flaw, and once rhythm is framed as a flaw, people begin apologizing for it. They adjust, they hide it, they stop passing it on. That's how calendars win without needing force. Not by proving themselves true, but by making other ways of keeping time feel ridiculous. And when the laughter survives, but the memory doesn't, the calendar no longer needs defending. And yet, for all the edits, the enforcement, the laughter that smoothed the edges, time itself never agreed. And if something in you already knows where this is going, if this moment feels strangely familiar, that's because we've stood here before. Long before calendars argued over dates, long before empires debated beginnings, there was a moment in the year that didn't need declaring: the longest night. Ancient people didn't discover it through belief. They noticed it, because everything around them responded. The sun's path slowed across the horizon. Day by day it rose lower in the sky, until it reached a point where it seemed to stop. For several days, nothing changed. The light didn't retreat further, but it didn't return either. It held. The stillness wasn't symbolic. It was observable. And it mattered, because survival depended on what happened next. Across cultures that never met, the same attention appears. In Egypt, these days marked the sun's passage through the underworld, a dangerous crossing before its return. In Northern Europe, they were known as Mother's Night, when ancestral mothers were said to keep watch in the dark, so the light could find its way home. In Rome, the solstice crowned Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, whose rebirth was honored after the pause had passed. Different names, different stories, the same sky. What all these people were responding to wasn't a date. It was a turning. For 3 days the sun did not climb. And then quietly, it did. No announcement, no decree, no correction. The light returned because the sky moved, not because anyone told it to. That's why the solstice never disappeared, no matter how the calendar was rearranged. It could be renamed, absorbed, layered with new myths, painted over by softer colors, but it couldn't be erased. Because the sky doesn't follow administration. You can move dates. You can delete days. You can tell people when the year begins. But the sun still turns when it turns. And that's the line no empire ever crossed. And while some tried to standardize time into one story, the world never quite complied. Here's the part that still shocks people. Even well-educated, well-traveled people. There is no single year on Earth right now. Not symbolically, literally. While much of the Western world says it is 2025 or 2026, depending on which side of midnight you're on, millions of people are living in entirely different years. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, administratively, culturally, daily, and they always have been. In Ethiopia, the year is 2018, not because they're behind, because they never accepted Rome's maths. They use a 13-month calendar, 12 months of 30 days, plus a short 13th, 5 days, 6 in a leap year. Their new year begins in September, aligned with the return of green after the rains. Their biblical chronology differs from Western Christianity. Their date of the Annunciation differs. Their time was never corrected to match Rome. And here's the part no one likes to say out loud. Ethiopia was never colonized. Their calendar survived intact. Time in this case is not a superstition. It's sovereignty. In Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia, the official year is 2568. They use the Buddhist era calendar, which counts from the traditional date of the Buddha's passing. It's a solar calendar, aligned to seasons, but rooted in spiritual history, not Roman Empire. Daily life may run on the Gregorian calendar for business, but public buildings, legal documents, school timetables still reflect Buddhist time. They are not confused. They are bilingual in time. In Iran and Afghanistan, the year is 1403. They follow the solar Hijri calendar, one of the most astronomically precise systems ever designed. Their new year, Nowruz, begins not on a date, but at the exact moment of the spring equinox. This isn't religious guesswork. This is mathematics, astronomy, precision. Their year turns when the sky turns. And yet, in many Western narratives, these cultures are called behind. Behind what exactly? A calendar that deleted 10 days by papal decree? Much of the Muslim world lives in 2 years at once. The Hijri calendar, a purely lunar system, places the current year around 1447. It isn't corrected to stay in sync with the sun. It drifts, deliberately. Ramadan moves. Hajj moves. Sacred time shifts. Why? Because Islamic time was never meant to be aligned with agriculture or empire. It resists fixation. For daily administration, Gregorian time may be used, but for religious life, Hijri time is real. This isn't confusion. It's layered reality. China never adopted Roman time as a worldview. Traditionally, time reset with dynasties. Each emperor marked a new era. Even today, China uses Gregorian dates internationally, but cultural time still follows the lunar calendar. Chinese New Year, Mid-Autumn Festival, dates that move with the moon, not the grid. Time in China has always been cosmological and political, not linear and absolute. Japan uses the Gregorian calendar, but also tracks time by imperial reign. We are currently in Reiwa 7. When an emperor dies, time resets, not as nostalgia, as continuity. Time marks relationship, not just accumulation. Across much of Africa, time was never primarily counted in years. It was measured through seasons, rains, ancestral generations, migrations, events. The question wasn't, what year is it? It was, Who has lived? What has happened? This is why colonial historians claimed Africa had no history. What they meant was, Africa didn't use their system. Among the Dogon of West Africa, time is encoded through cosmology, not clocks. Past, present, ancestor, and cosmos coexist. Time isn't something you pass through. It's something you stand inside. So why weren't we taught this? Because admitting this breaks the illusion. It reveals that the Gregorian calendar is not neutral, not universal, not inevitable, just the loudest. And once you see that, a lot of other things crack open. Why Western culture calls itself modern and others behind. Why difference is framed as deficiency. Why empathy is replaced with pity. Why Europe called itself advanced, while living inside one of the most rigid time systems ever imposed. We weren't taught this because it destabilizes hierarchy. It shows that what we call progress is often just standardization with better branding. And maybe the most radical truth of all is this: the world doesn't share one clock. It never has. So when someone says, Happy New Year, I pause. Not because I'm trying to be difficult, not because I don't understand the ritual, because I do. I lived it. But because once you've seen that the world is living inside many timelines at once, many calendars, many beginnings, many ways of counting meaning, it becomes impossible to pretend one date owns the truth. We're not just living in different years, we're living in different decks, some chosen, some dealt, and some shuffled back into our hands like a memory. Different counts, different resets, different ideas of when time turns and why. Some calendars follow the sun, some follow the moon, some follow emperors, some follow prophets, some follow ancestors, some refuse numbering altogether and count only through memory, reigns, seasons, or events. None of them are accidents. They exist because cultures decide what matters enough to mark. And the fact that we were never taught this, that we were raised inside one European timeline and told it was neutral, modern, universal, that wasn't coincidence. That was training. Training to believe your calendar is reality, that everyone else is behind, or ahead, or confused, or symbolic. But in truth, many of those cultures didn't fail to modernize time. They refused to flatten it. They kept it relational, ritual, embedded in land, sky, and lineage. And we were never taught that, because it would break the illusion that progress only moves one way. So, no, I'm not going to wish you Happy New Year like it's a fact, because my body doesn't feel like it's beginning anything right now. It feels like it's resting, digesting, standing between cycles. Winter for me is not a starting gun, it's a pause, and I'm done pretending otherwise. So instead, I'll say this: whatever calendar you live by, whatever clock you trust, whatever rhythm your body, your land, your faith, or your memory still answers to, I hope this turning treats you gently. I hope you're allowed to rest where rest is needed. I hope you don't force beginnings that haven't arrived. I hope you don't apologize for being out of sync with a system that was never built for you. I will see you again, not on a date, not on a schedule, but when the rhythm feels right. I am going to have a pause. I feel tired. It's been a really intense year for me and my family. It's been a huge transition. We have loads of projects on the run, and we are absolutely exhausted. So I am going to follow the rhythm of the land, and I'm going to rest. And this is not a goodbye. I will definitely see you again. There's so much more that I want to share with you. But for now, I'm just going to feel the land and rest. And I will see you soon. Trust me. Until then, Take care of your time. Bye.